Hello, this is Ben from Literature Review HQ. .com, and now I'm going to make a short video about something that's very important to the literature review, and that is structure. Now, a lot of people only consider that there is one kind of structure to the literature review, and this is certainly the most common one and the easiest one, and in a lot of cases it's actually the best way to do it. And the best way to explain it is to draw a triangle. So when you do your literature review, you start out with some very broad, basically. At the start, you explain a lot of background to your specific subject. You explain things that are very kind of tentatively related, but do explain aspects of the more specific areas of your literature review, and then you gradually get more and more specific until you're talking about something at the end in your conclusion that is quite specific. You know, it's answering quite a specific question related to the literature that you're interested in. So you're addressing a specific issue, but you start with things that aren't so specific. They all have some kind of small influence on the more specific nature of what you're doing, but they're not specific themselves, very broad, and you gradually narrow down the articles that you read until you're actually reading something that is very specific, very recent, and relating to quite a narrow area of the literature. So this is the most common one. This is what is taught most regularly, and by broad, you can kind of think in terms of different subjects, different kind of years. You could think of broad as being all the literature that was published before a certain date, because that's less relevant to more current literature. It all depends exactly on what field you're in and what kind of thing you're reading, and it depends how, as you're reading the literature, it depends how it kind of forms in your head, and when you're kind of making notes, it depends what kind of constitutes the actual broad background of the literature and what constitutes the more specific. So you need to kind of work that out for yourself when you're reading. Although this is the most common one, but there are other ways to do it as well. So instead of starting, so this is kind of at the beginning of your literature review here, and this is the end, and so it's quite a logical progression. But it may not be that easy to do, depending on the type of literature you have or the type of articles you have. It may not be that easy to start off broad. You may want to keep circling back to broad topics, or they may be generally broad but have some specific aspects to them. So this triangle is very simple, but sometimes if you want to make a more complex argument, it can be quite restrictive to structure your review in this way. Another way to do it is to think of your literature review like some circles. And so each of these areas is individual in their own right. They would represent the broad aspects of your literature review, because each individual one is unrelated for the most part. So you've got all these areas that are unrelated. So you've got these two areas here which are related between themselves, these two areas are related between themselves, and these two areas are related between themselves. But then in the middle here, you've got this area, and that is essentially your literature review. That is where all these areas come together and form and actually explain part of the same thing. So it may be that you want to discuss your area, your research like this, so discuss each individual area and then come together at the end with the intersecting point. Or you may want to start with the intersecting point here and then explain them all, go off in tangents and explain the theory behind the intersecting point in relation to these three different fields, or however they may be. Another way of doing this, if you can't start off broad and go narrow, is to maybe do it in like a jigsaw kind of way. So you kind of have a piece here, then you've got your jigsaw piece there, and you find another bit of the literature that kind of fits in here, and another bit that fits in here, and another bit that fits in there. So you end up with your entire literature review, but again, all these areas are slightly different, but they all kind of fit in together. So you don't start off with a very, very broad area and work down to a narrow area. Instead, you explain. You kind of think that all these different individual areas have a roughly equal weighting when it comes to explaining what you want to talk about in your literature review. So instead of going from broad to narrow, you go from one subject and discuss the next one, then maybe go on to the next one, and then the next one, and you'd explain in each way how they kind of link together, to explain why they are joined together at these intersections and why they are relevant to each other, and relate this all back to the theme of the literature review. So why any of this, why any of the individual components of the jigsaw are actually relevant to the literature review itself. So that's a quick overview of structure and how it's important. It's just something to bear in mind. I find in most cases this simple structure, this most common structure, works absolutely brilliantly. It makes, it obviously makes things very clear. You start off very broad, get more and more specific until you're explaining a very, very specific point. That's great. That's what everyone wants to. If someone sees that in a literature review, they're going to understand it. They're going to be able to follow it very, very easily. However, if you're reading and you find that the literature you have doesn't fit very easily into this structure, then maybe try one of these other ones and see how that works. So for more information on this kind of thing and about doing literature reviews, head over to my blog at literaturreviewhq.com and check me out on Twitter. I'm at litreviewhq. Thanks very much for listening.